Hello there, and welcome to this edition of Strong at Home. I'm Dr. Brenda Murphy, and I'm an educational psychologist, and I'm here to have some conversations with people that I know will help you to be strong at home. After all, that is our goal, isn't it? Is to take what goes on in the world around us, and when we are in our home environment, to make it a place of security and safety and love and health. And today I am so excited to introduce you to one of my, she doesn't expect this, one of my very favorite people in the whole world. This is Dr. Kathy Greenberg. And Kathy was my advisor during my doctoral studies at the University of Tennessee. And I have waited for this moment so that I can share Kathy with all of you and with all the people that I know that can benefit so greatly from Kathy's wisdom and knowledge and experience and education. And I don't know if you're blushing yet, Kathy, but she has an extensive background, has been an internationally recognized scholar in the field of teaching and learning and in the field of cognition and learning. And she has spent her whole career helping others. And if you saw the title of our session today, it was I Failed Jimmy. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Greenberg?
Oh, thank you, Brenda, for your kind words. Jimmy was a boy in the very first class I taught in public school. Before I became a university professor, I taught 10 years in public education. And I was responsible for 3 fifth grade classes and a 7th grade class. Jimmy was in my 5th grade class, but he was 13. And that should have been a clue that there was a problem. And I found out later he had been retained in grades 3 times in his little life up until then. But it took me 6 weeks to realize that he couldn't read and he couldn't write. School, in my language arts classes, I asked the children to write an ending to a story that we had created together. And as the children passed up their papers, they were all seated in rows, and the papers would come from the back of the row up. And Jimmy was kind of in the middle of the room, and I saw him look around with a very worried expression on his face, and then he slid his paper into the middle of that stack. So that was the end of class that day as his class.
Kind of like that. Is that kind
of like that? Exactly.
Yes.
So I quickly thumbed through all the papers to see what in the world was going on with Jimmy. And all he had written were scribble marks up and down the page. No words at all.
Oh my goodness.
That afternoon, I went down the hall to see the remedial reading teacher, and I said, "There's been a mistake. I have Jimmy in my class. He's 13 in the 5th grade. He can't read or write. He belongs in your class." And she looked at me and said, "No, he doesn't. He's too low functioning for my class." I said, "Well, isn't there special education or something like that?" And she looked even more cynical and said, "Well, you can go talk to that teacher." So I went on down the hall to the special ed teacher's room. And she said, "Oh, I know about Jimmy too. He's too high functioning for my class." So I was bewildered, but I said, this child has got to learn to read and write. And for some reason, I thought I could teach him. So I went back to the remedial reading teacher and got beginning level reading materials. And the next day, I pulled Jimmy aside and said, "You and I are going to have our own reading group. And this year, you're going to learn to read." And I handed him a workbook with little bunny rabbits on it, something 5-year-olds would enjoy, not 13-year-olds. Sweet little Jimmy threw the book across the room.
Oh my God.
I could not figure out how to work with him. I thought I could teach anybody anything. I couldn't teach Jimmy. And so we kind of silently agreed, if you don't disturb me, I won't disturb you. And I watched and saw that Jimmy didn't have a real good approach to any task that he did. And he didn't seem to work to make meaning out of any task. He never asked me any questions. He didn't check his work at all. Sometimes workbook pages would be so set up so that really you could respond. He could copy a word or whatever without my realizing. That's why I didn't realize for 6 weeks, is that it wasn't real substantial learning going on those workbook pages.
Oh, yes, we hear about that. Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. And I years later realized he was really pretty smart because, and I always thought that he had definitely had the intelligence to learn, that everybody does if approached in the right way. But one of his strategies was, I won't try and then I won't fail. So he did not motivate his behavior. But oh my goodness, the attention he paid to his feelings. I watched him literally shrivel up in the classroom, putting his head down, as other children learned about his problems and made fun of him. Usually not in my ear sight, so there wasn't much that I felt I could do at that time. But he just felt so bad, and failure was so strong that he wouldn't even try. So I failed Jimmy, but I vowed I would never fail another child in my life as a teacher. And the next year, I took a job as a remedial reading teacher and thought they're going to have to train me how to work with children that can't read. And I did learn some things, but I still found as the years went on, I then began to work with children with learning disabilities. And I found that, okay, I could help them learn to read. I could use different approaches based on the needs of that child. One approach doesn't work for everyone. And I could help them with math skills and other skills. But there was something really missing in their thinking. They'd show up for a small group to work on what was best for them in my classroom, and they'd forget their book or their pencil. Or one child, adorable child, ride the school bus, and many days he would come in looking very dejected because he had lost his temper and gotten in trouble, and there were consequences for that with riding the bus. He just couldn't control himself. And I began to think, well, there's got to be something that I can do. And about that time, I got an invitation to join a class for teachers taught by Professor Reuven Feuerstein from Israel and his colleagues, that was to teach children how to learn. And I became a part of that class and became an advocate for the kind of work that Reuven Feuerstein and his colleagues were doing and have been for the rest of my life. Eventually, when I came to the University of Tennessee, I developed an education model, first for Head Start, and then as part of one of 12 national models for education to serve children coming from Head Start into the first years of school, a national follow-through project that no longer exists, but was a wonderful program in which universities with ways to teach partnered with schools, where you were not just telling teachers something to do and then disappearing, but you were a long-term partner. So teachers really helped me to develop the Cognitive Enrichment Advantage approach.
I'd like to show the book here so everyone can see this. This is Kathy's work that is still being used today. We'll talk a lot more about this in some of our other sessions with Dr. Greenberg, but I wanted to just stop right here and show the book for all of you. It's a great resource, and we'll talk about why. I'll continue with your story, Dr. Greenberg, because it's a great story, and then I'll go back and ask some questions, but I didn't want to stop what you were in the process of saying.
Sure. Well, I should go back to say that in that first class after the workshop on learning how to learn, I used a program that Feuerstein and his colleagues developed called Instrumental Enrichment, or Feuerstein's Instrumental Enrichment. I still get goosebumps when I think about these children with learning disabilities. They were ages 11 to 14. I think I had 10 of them. The changes in them, it was like they were saying, you mean I'm not lucky if I get it and unlucky if I don't? There's something I can do to help with my learning. And I watched as they didn't want to cheat off each other just to finish some paper, but rather they would actually hide their work so that they could proudly say, I did this, I figured out how to solve this challenge, and I worked it. And they would want to share their strategy, what they did, what worked for them. Well, I began to realize I wasn't doing a good job of, when I taught them reading later in the day, of really talking about this kinds of strategies that they were learning to use. And later, when I came to University of Tennessee and began, to teach teachers, or people learning to be teachers, I realized I wasn't doing a good job of telling them about this, that they would have to go out and get Feuerstein's Instrumental Enrichment Program, which is not an easy thing. An individual probably wouldn't purchase it. It's for schools to purchase, and it is expensive. So I started working on an approach that any teacher or parent in any situation could use. And I learned so much from the parents, not only in the follow-through project where we worked with 6 different schools over 7 years, but also demonstration, those were demonstration sites. And then we worked with many other schools. And then we began to expand and work in more than 6 other countries. And I learned from teachers who were using the CEA approach and began to refine what it is that I now share with teachers and also with parents. Because what we found is that if you've got a shared vocabulary around what we'll later talk about as meta-strategic knowledge of how to build learning strategies that meet your need, then you can have this partnership between family and school so that the comprehensive teaching method, that parents are able to support that at home. And in one teacher who did her dissertation on using the CEA approach with students who had dyslexia, she found that an 8-year-old in her program called it the rules for life, that these strategies were things that he could rely on and he could go through, pick out one that was important to him, but even more significant, could refine it and adapt it to meet a particular learning need at a particular time. Because that's what it's all about. There's lots of programs available in schools and probably for parents too, where you teach the one right strategy to use in a certain situation, and that's what the child is told to use. And what we learned is that each child would choose one that was most significant to them. And one of our follow-through teachers with first graders who were doing pretty well in school, and late in the spring, they were writing sentences. And she said, all right, choose your favorite one of these learning strategies, one of these building blocks of thinking, and tell me why it's important to you. And she was amazed. Every single student could write down their sentence. They went quickly to work to do it, but they chose the one she would have chosen for them. A student who always lacked confidence chose a feeling of competence, as we call it, to focus on the feelings and understanding them so you can turn them around and approach your stumbling blocks by turning them into stepping stones. A child who is impulsive would choose the building block of controlled expression to focus on, I've got to control how I don't rush into something, but I slowly look it over and see what I'm supposed to do. Or a child who goes ahead and rushes in, that doesn't work well for them, but they're able to say, I want to have a precise understanding. So that child might choose precision and accuracy, and that would automatically slow you down so that you would gather more information, be sure you understood what it is you needed to do, and then be able to solve your own problem.
I just love, one of the things that you said just a moment ago, Dr. Greenberg, that just really jumped out at me is you said that with this approach, with the CEA, Cognitive Enrichment Advantage approach, children are able to take stumbling blocks and turn them into stepping stones. And I think that for me, that is one of the important pieces of what your work has always done, and why I want parents who are watching our Strong at Home to become involved and know about this, is that it is possible, not just possible, but probable, that every child, when they are taught these thinking strategies, can have control over their own lives, and things that they have seen as something that was a weakness can, in fact, become a strength because they've learned to think about it with intentionality. And this can work, as you've shown with your program, at home and at school. And of course, we're talking about parents who are being strong at home. So believe it or not, our session, our conversation is over for right now. We have completed our fifth. I know it goes so fast. And there were so many points that you made that I know that parents who are wanting to be strong at home were just hanging on to. So we are going to have another conversation with Dr. Greenberg and try to expand on some of these to grow your understanding, and then find ways in which you can actually work with and help the people to be able to work with you and to be strong at home for your families. So we are going to end for today. We have, we'll end as we always do. We'll end with our prayer. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he watch over you. May he shine his face upon you and give you peace. Peace to all of you, and thank you, Dr. Greenberg, for being with you. We'll see you very soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.